Teachability is one of the three sub-elements of the larger element of intellectual development in one of the picture of health in the whole leader model. Now, teachability is the intellectual humility that regularly pursues new ideas, challenging pre-existing mental frameworks and methods. And this has application for not only us as individuals, but specifically this shows up in unique ways as we navigate leading people and leading organizations from one place to a preferred picture of a future, towards a vision. And there are some benchmarks that we have identified that we can use to say, am I demonstrating or am I embodying a healthy intellectual development approach specific to the area of teachability? Am I embodying that? Am I modeling it? And am I cultivating a culture of teachability on my team and throughout my organization? And so let's look at some specific benchmarks so we can use to assess as we lead people and organizations whether or not we are teachable. The first benchmark is that a leader who is teachable, who is demonstrating that intellectual humility, is one who is stimulated when their ideas and methods are challenged. Now, inherent to this benchmark, to this behavior, is the idea that our methods will be challenged. Our ideas will be challenged. In leadership, many times it is easy to be caught up in a silo of yes people or groupthink because you're the leader and you're the one with the positional authority, and people are not willingly giving you critical feedback that challenge your methods and your ideas because there is a power dynamic at play, whether we like it or not. And so as leaders, are we creating environments where our ideas and methods are challenged? And where are they being challenged? There's a whole host of different ways and environments that we can experience being challenged. But the primary one that we're aiming for is that we would love for the people that we lead and the people that we lead with would have the opportunity to provide critical insight and feedback and freedom to challenge our ideas and our methods. As we navigate or as we create these environments, our minds should be stimulated in these conversations. We should cultivate a desire to say, let's have a conversation about these ideas and let's do it with my team so that we can, the ultimate end state being, we can challenge ideas and frameworks. But apart from our team, there's other ways in which you can do this, whether it be listening to podcasts, reading books, even formal education. I love formal professional development environments because the level of accountability for your ideas and your methods is a little bit heightened as opposed to passively listening to a podcast or reading a book. But what environments are you creating that stimulate your ideas and your methods being challenged? Are you embracing that? Do you hate it when those things happen? When your ideas, it's like, oh, I got to think about a new idea or a new method. Do you loathe it or are you stimulated by it? That's a good benchmark for whether or not we are healthy in our teachability. The next benchmark is in teachability, in leadership, is that a leader is teachable, generally speaking, if they readily adapt their thinking and their methods when a better way to achieve the vision is recognized. Now again, the key component of leadership is the pursuit and helping people achieve a picture of a preferred future, the vision. And so this benchmark is of critical importance because if we are teachable, we are readily adapting thinking and behaviors because it's the better way to achieve the vision. We are more concerned with the vision than we are with our own reputation or our own methodology because the vision matters more than what we decided was the way to do it. And there's a difference. There's a qualifier in this, and that's readily. A teachable leader readily adapts their thinking and behaviors. And that's very distinct from begrudgingly adapts and their thinking and behavior. I don't know about you, but if you've ever had a leader who you present a good idea and the idea is good and it will help contribute to the vision more than the current way of doing things, and if they say something like, I guess we'll do that, that's not a ringing endorsement of the idea. That is not a readily adaptive and readily accepting leader who implements new ideas and thinking. As leaders, we want to be embracing these new ideas, embracing these new methods for the sake of the vision. What's funny is that in the Marine Corps, I spent 13 years in the Marine Corps, and the Marine Corps is a unique beast because when you're stateside, it's very rigid, very hierarchical, very regimented training. But then when you go and you fight a war, the motto essentially shifts to adapt and overcome. And there is specific ways in which we do things, but when you are in the situation and the vision, the battle, the mission takes precedence over the method, we become very adaptive in the way we do things. One quick example is that normally, as we were in Afghanistan or Iraq, if you are on a patrol and you find an improvised explosive device, the traditional doctrinal approach is that you stop, you do a little cordon around it, which means you circle it to make sure no one can get to it. You radio in for the explosive ordnance disposal team. They come, they're the professionals, they detonate it, and they take care of it. One of the things that happened is that we found that we were waiting 4 or 5 hours for explosive ordnance to show up, to come and deal with it. So some Marines decided to say, look, you know what? We're going to try to take this into our own hands, which sounds crazy, but they're Marines. We're going to adapt and overcome. And what they would do is one of the things they did, and they got a 30-foot bamboo pole from a local Afghan. They put a metal sickle, and they taped it to the end, another thing from the local Afghans. They laid on the ground, and they reached that sickle all the way up to front, and they put their head down, and they scraped the dirt, trying to dig up the wire for the pressure plate improvised explosive device. And they'd scrape it, and then they'd eventually scrape it up, and then they'd unearth it, and then they'd be able to see it more clearly and be able to see where the pressure plate would go, and they don't want to detonate it, and they could dispose of it on their own. Now, is that anything like the doctrine that they were taught? No. But they adapted and overcame, and they found a new way and a new method to help achieve the mission and the vision. And you know what happened? A week later, it was standard operating procedure for everybody in the area of operations. Every single person was walking on patrol with a 30-foot bamboo pole with a sickle on top because it was an effective way to do things. And we didn't worry about it being not doctrinal. We didn't worry about it not being the way that we were taught, but we worried about it was effective. Leaders who are teachable readily adapt thinking and methods when a better way to achieve the vision shows up. Another benchmark of a teachable leader is someone who knows how their preferences and their biases shape how they respond to new ideas and methods. This is a really important one for us leaders because it builds in a couple things. First thing is that there's a level of self-awareness on how my preferences and my biases shape the way I view things. There's nothing wrong with personal preferences. Everybody has personal preferences. Everyone has personal preferences on the music you listen to. Everyone has personal preferences on the best way leadership should be accomplished, the way to write an email, the best way to communicate. Preferences are fine. There's neither right nor wrong in most cases. But if we're not aware as leaders of how our personal preferences inform our willingness to accept new ideas, then we have a problem. If I don't accept a better solution or a better method because I prefer something else, I am arrogantly putting my desires and my preferences above the needs of the organization and my people. Worse than that is the idea of biases. Everybody has biases. The question is, are we aware of those biases? And how are those biases informing my willingness to accept and respond to new ideas and new methods? I'll give an example. I am in my 40s now. I'm no longer a young leader. I have too much gray in my beard and not enough hair on my head. I'm not a young leader anymore. The question is, when I sit around with other leaders and I'm debating ideas and I'm thinking about new methods and new ideas, if someone who is younger than me, let's say they're in their teens, late teens, and they give a perspective and they give an idea and it's a good idea, do I have some sort of bias around the fact that they are a young leader and they have not lived and they don't have the experience that I have, and that's why I shouldn't listen to them? Conversely, if someone is over the age of 65, do I immediately discount their opinion because technology has passed them by, they're outside of their potential prime? Do we have biases that inform my desire or my readiness and willingness to embrace new ideas? Now, bias shows up in a whole bunch of different ways. The question is, are we aware of it? And unlike personal preferences, which are really neither good nor bad in many cases, biases generally are things that we need to eliminate from our leadership. And we need to ask the Lord and the Holy Spirit to work in our hearts to help us be aware of those biases and remove them for the sake of the mission. Because in the same way, if we elevate our personal preferences and our biases above adapting new ideas, we have selfishly prioritized the things that we care about over the vision and the mission of the organization. Another benchmark of a teachable leader is one who rigorously investigates ideas and viewpoints that are different from their own in order to see if they are valid. I don't know about you, but if you spend any time on social media, you're going to see a lot of what they call straw manning of arguments. You're going to see people who misrepresent or intentionally represent only a little tiny fraction, only the worst parts of an idea or an approach or a method, and they pass it off as if it's a critical, rigorous critique of that whole viewpoint, that whole methodology, that whole idea. It drives me bonkers. It drives me more bonkers because I see people who believe things, who are articulating arguments against some of the things that I hold dear or the principles that I hold, and they straw man it, and I'm sitting here saying, you are not accurately representing that idea. That's not what we actually believe. And if you're like me, you probably don't like that as well. But as leaders, are we doing that subconsciously in the way that we approach other ideas, other different viewpoints? Are we simply straw manning them and saying, no, yeah, idea's not for me? Or are we rigorously investigating them? And by rigorously, we mean essentially, am I investigating them to prove that they are true, as opposed to investigating them to prove that they are untrue? Because that's two very different things. If I'm investigating to prove something that's not true, I'm going to layer on all sorts of confirmation bias and say, look, I'm just going to cherry pick a couple things and say, look at all this research I did. They all prove that this idea is untrue. Therefore, it's not a valid approach. It's not a valid viewpoint. As opposed to, I'm going to investigate it so much because I'm going to try to prove it as if I'm an advocate. Essentially, the way that they train people who do professional debating. You should know your opponent's ideas and your opponent's viewpoints better than you know your own. Are we as leaders demonstrating teachability by rigorously investigating ideas and viewpoints that are contrary to our own? Because we value and we prioritize the mission and the vision over our own personal viewpoints and our own personal principles. If we're willing to investigate and demonstrate intellectual humility, we'll see if those are actually valid, and we can take what we want, to take the good parts and implement them to achieve the vision. And ultimately, this is a bit of an exercise in empathy as well. I am going to put myself in the other people's shoes, and I'm going to, especially for people that I lead who have different viewpoints, I'm going to put myself in their shoes. I'm going to try to understand what their viewpoint is because I want to empathize with them. I want to help my leaders become the leaders that are effective. Am I teachable by rigorously investigating? Another benchmark of a teachable leader is one who readily accepts and implements new ways of doing things when they are the best option, regardless of how things have been done before. Now, if you've been around any sort of church leadership or maybe a family business or something that's been around for a long time, the answer to the question, why are we doing that, of, well, that's the way we've always done it, sometimes that's not the answer that we get, but that's what people say. That's essentially what they're saying. We've always done it that way, so that's why we do it that way. And if we are teachable, healthy leaders in our intellectual development, this is not an answer that we can tolerate. It's not an answer we can tolerate in our own leadership. We should not be giving that answer, and we should not accept that answer from the people that we lead. Though we're doing it because it's the way we've always done it, is resigning ourselves to defeat, saying, that's how it's always been done, there's nothing we can do about it. And we're essentially just blame shifting. We're saying, I'm not responsible for it. That's someone else made that decision and it's their fault. When in fact the responsibility rests on our shoulders to find the best method and to challenge existing methodologies and ideas. The best option means that we are presupposing numerous different courses of action. The work of leaders is to not just make a decision, but to be able to say, here's our different courses of action. If we're not going to do it the way it's always been done, what are those courses of action? And can we walk down the line on a bunch of those different courses of action to see what all the potential ripple-on effects of each of those courses of action would be? And that we can find a solution that is best. So, if we are teachable, if we're demonstrating intellectual humility, the answer to the question, why do we do it that way, of that's the way it's always been done, is neither acceptable to us, it's not acceptable for the people that we lead. The last benchmark around teachability has to do specifically with our teams. If you are a teachable leader who is demonstrating intellectual humility, you're going to promote a spirit of inquiry on your team and with others. You're going to promote a spirit of inquiry on your team and others. Now, there's a difference between being naturally inquisitive and being curious and to be an investigative person on your leadership, in your own personal leadership, but how are you cultivating a sense of inquiry among the people that you lead and the team that you lead? How are you encouraging them to expand their interest from a very finite, narrow sense, specific to their role and their responsibilities, and expand their interest and their inquisitiveness and curiosity to a broader range of interests? Because when we expose ourselves to a broader range of interests, we are going to find different ideas and be challenged accordingly. Similarly, you are going to model humble inquiry by focusing on others and asking them questions about what they're learning and what's been new to them, as opposed to just telling them all of the new different ways you have discovered. It's one thing for me as a leader to go to a professional development seminar, do some reading and a podcast, and then I just show up and I regurgitate it to my team. That's distinctly different than me telling everybody and inviting them to be inquisitive themselves and then asking them about what they've learned and how it applies to their role and how it could apply to our organization. There's other ways that we can do this in a more structured and systematic way, and that is, how are you promoting professional development for your team? Are you requiring them to participate in formal environments of professional development? If not, the question is why? Where in your budget are you building in professional development for your people? This is a common occurrence in many large-scale corporations, but how are we working it in our smaller churches, in our missionary fields, in our other smaller business? How are we prioritizing their development as we prioritize it through the budget? And ultimately, the best way to foster and promote a spirit of inquiry is to work collaboratively. Invite their voices into big decisions, into the ideas, into the methodologies, and why we're doing what we're doing. That's the best way to demonstrate and to foster a sense of teachability and intellectual humility on your team. Now, we've spent a lot of time talking about a couple different benchmarks. It seems maybe potentially overwhelming. It seems like there's a lot of stuff to do. But really, the principle is this. As leaders, we should demonstrate a dedication to teachability, a dedication to pursuing new ideas rooted in some intellectual humility, because we don't know everything, and we are open to learning new ways, new approaches, ultimately for the sake of the mission and the vision of the organization.